Welcome to the N1 Fitness Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Marcus Sidhu, and today we are chatting about booze and how it relates to fat loss. So right off the bat, I want to mention if fat loss is your goal and you drink regularly, I'd actually not recommend that you completely cut out alcohol unless you plan on not drinking for a pretty extensive period of time. And you might be wondering, like, what? The fat loss guy is recommending that I continue to drink. So let me explain. Let's say you dedicate 12 weeks to a fat loss phase. So you're going to really hunker down for 3 months. Now, normally you drink socially, so you probably want to keep alcohol in your routine because that way you can learn how to manage alcohol intake given your new lifestyle. Because if you completely cut it out for those 3 months, you're going to have to learn how to reintegrate it afterwards, which is just more difficult to do long term. Now, don't get me wrong, alcohol has calories, which we'll get into, and you'll most likely get faster results if you completely refrain from it via an overall caloric reduction. But we want to think long game here. So in my opinion, it just makes a lot more sense. It's much more sustainable and probably just a better approach in general to keep alcohol in and then maybe just adjust your intake if need be, but still be able to drink socially and achieve your goals. Because again, we want to approach this like a lifestyle, not a temporary, I'm going to do X for 12 weeks and then just go back to what I was doing before afterwards. Because if you do go back to what you were doing before you lost the weight, one thing that's a guarantee is that whatever weight you lost is going to be gained back. Now, if you're only after a short-term shift, like for a beach vacation, something like that, that's a different story, right? But that's not the angle that I take with my clients personally. So this podcast episode is more geared towards the person that's after a lifestyle shift, not just a temporary look good on the beach for a week in Mexico sort of dealio. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, nothing wrong with that at all. It's just not who this specific information is aimed at, that's all. So now that we've established some context, let's dig into the deets. So alcohol contains 7 calories per gram. And if you've been following me for a while now, you're probably aware that protein and carbohydrates clock in at 4 calories per gram, and then fat has 9 calories per gram. So in the real world, that means a shot of whiskey, gin, vodka, etc. has about 100 calories. A 5-ounce glass of wine sits around 125 calories. And then a standard beer is right around 150 calories. Now, personally, I'm a beer guy. I absolutely love it. Not so much the Budweisers or Heinekens, but more so craft beer. So like the really hoppy IPAs are my go-to. However, a lot of the craft beer these days is super boozy, meaning it doesn't have that standard 5% alcohol content. You're looking at much higher percentages, especially in IPAs. Lots of them are in the 6, 7, 8% range, which equates to more calories because, like I mentioned before, alcohol has 7 calories per gram. So a higher alcohol percentage drink has a higher caloric content. The same goes for wine. So some wines are in the 9 or 10% range, and then others are upwards of 14 or 15%. So not all beer is created equal, not all wine is created equal from a sheer caloric load angle. So that means that given the same volume of liquid, so for example, a 12-ounce beer that is 5% alcohol or a 12-ounce beer that's 7% alcohol, the 7%er has more calories than the 5%er. The same thing goes for wine. So a 5-ounce glass of wine that's 11% versus, say, 14%, the 14%er has a higher caloric load given the same volume of liquid. So that's solely the calorie part of the equation, but of course, booze alters your state to a degree, right? It's a drug. So we want to take a look at how alcohol interacts with nutrition, workouts, your movement practice, sleep, and then lastly, the social connection piece, which is super important as well. But first up, let's talk nutrition. So just like the calorie content in the food we eat matters, so does the calorie content in the alcohol we consume, because our number one priority when it comes to fat loss is maintaining a calorie deficit. However, what type how much and then when you consume that alcohol matters because it's going to impact your eating behaviors in a big way. For example, some folks tend to eat a lot more when they drink, and then others seem to almost be turned off of food completely and just kind of want to sip and socialize. So it's important to know yourself and your tendencies when it comes to how food and alcohol interplay in your life. As far as what type of alcohol you go for, I've noticed in myself as well as my clients that certain types tend to impact their appetite in different ways. So for example, some folks find that beer makes them feel super full and then they end up eating a lot less because they feel less snacky. But then wine, on the other hand, has them want to crush an entire charcuterie board because it really stimulates their appetite. So this is a pretty common setup for a lot of folks. Also, it could be the reverse, right? Where beer stimulates their appetite and wine reduces it, or maybe even some people just find that all alcohol stimulates their appetite or all alcohol reduces their appetite. Everybody's going to be different, so just know thyself. Now, here's where the interplay is really important because someone might choose wine based on the fact that the average glass has about 125 calories and an average beer sits around 150 calories. So the wine wins in that scenario. However, if this person finds that their appetite is stimulated by the wine and then eats a bunch with it, whereas with the beer, they wouldn't have consumed any additional calories via food, the beer is going to be a better choice. So basically what I'm getting at here is zoom out a little, look at the big picture instead of looking at solely how many calories are in the alcohol you choose. It's also worth noting that no human that I know of, at least, makes better food decisions when they're drunk or hungover, and we definitely don't need a double-blind, placebo-controlled study to prove that. So the amount of total alcohol you consume is super important, both the night of, because the more buzzed you feel, likely the worse your food decisions are going to be, and then also the day after, as far as how hungover that given amount of alcohol makes you feel. So I'm going to paint a little picture here. You're going to be a lot more likely to hit a late night pizza joint if you've had, say, 6 drinks than if you've had 1 or 2. So not only are the calories and the alcohol impacting your fat loss efforts, but also then a couple slices factor in as well, right? After the 6 drink scenario. Then the next day, if that pizza didn't soak up all the booze, you're going to be a lot more likely to order in and hang out on the couch or head out for a calorie-dense brunch with possibly another drink or two to shake out the cobwebs from the night before. Also, if you decide to head out for brunch or order in when you're hungover, it's not like you're going to hit Chipotle and skip the sour cream and cheese or go for a poke bowl. It's most likely going to be, a fucking burger and fries or the full meal deal, eggs, bacon, sausage, and hash browns sort of things. So we're looking at easily, say, 1,000 calories there if we have a bevy or two as well, right? Now, all of a sudden, in this scenario, one night turns into potentially the calories in the booze, the pizza, maybe even some leftovers in the fridge when you get home right before your head hits the pillow. I know that's the case for myself. And then possibly a calorie-dense breakfast and or brunch. That stuff all adds up. So let's say you had 4 beers. That's about 600 calories. 2 slices of pizza is conservatively 600 calories. And then 1,000 calories from brunch the following day. No problem. So that's 2,200 calories total, conservatively speaking. That's enough to wipe out your whole deficit from the week in essentially a 12-hour period. So it sounds a little doom and gloom, but it's actually really common to underestimate just how easy it is to have a complete washout week results-wise. And it really sucks because you worked really hard all week to be in a calorie deficit, but then it's just that easy to erase all that hard work. So it just feels like you're spinning your wheels. So closing out that nutrition part, keep an eye on what type of alcohol impacts your appetite and in what way, and then take a step back and look at how your food decisions are swayed in one way or another based on whether you had a bunch of drinks on a Friday night or you stayed in, watched Netflix, and got a solid sleep, for example. So there's likely a pretty big calorie swing there. Moving on to movement and workouts. Working out sucks when you're hungover, so we're just going to assume that that's not going to happen. Even a long walk can be a struggle when you're feeling rough around the edges, so booze is going to impact how much or how little you move as well. The couch is super appealing as it is, but it's obviously extra appealing when you're feeling tired, hungover, nauseous, whatever symptoms you get. Now, that equates to fewer calories burned because, as you're well aware, we burn fewer calories at rest versus when we're moving. So, for example, let's say you aim and hit 8 to 10,000 steps per day on average, but then after a night out, you barely leave the house, if at all, so you hit like 2 or 3K. That's a big difference in calories burned, and not to mention how creaky your back and just your body in general might feel after a lazy day on the couch. Now, we're going to get into the sleep piece specifically, but less movement is likely going to lead to lower quality sleep because I'm sure you've experienced a big day of activity. You typically sleep like a baby that night, right? Also, less movement usually means less light exposure, and less light exposure means lower quality sleep as well, because light exposure via the outdoors helps anchor and set our circadian rhythm, or just our body clock. So I hope you're sort of starting to see how all these pieces of the puzzle fit together and impact one another. Unfortunately or fortunately, our behaviors have a serious snowball effect on one another, so it's essentially impossible to separate out things like nutrition, sleep, movement, stress management, because they're like legs on a stool, right? If you remove one, you're going to seriously impact the other legs, and then if you remove 2 legs, the stool can't even stand up anymore. So closing up the movement section, what I find really helps me after a night of a few too many pops is to shower as soon as I wake up. For some reason, that always makes me feel a lot better, and then get out for a walk ASAP. Don't let your mind convince you otherwise, just do it. That should get you off on the right foot. And after having moved like that, you're going to be more likely to make better food decisions. But even if you don't, going for that walk is better than not going for that walk. On the sleep front, the research is super clear that alcohol intake impacts sleep big time. And less sleep equates to higher calorie food decisions the following day. We're talking in the range of 200 to 300 calories easy. Now, that's quite a bit. That really adds up, especially when you compound it over the course of a week or a month if you've got some sleep debt you need to pay off. And potentially that's some serious weight gain. But sleep and how it relates to body comp is a whole nother podcast in itself. So back to our alcohol and sleep situation specifically, you're probably going to go to bed later after a night out, which can lead to messing with your circadian rhythm, which again is just a fancy word for body clock. So if you normally go to bed at 11 p.m., but after a night out, you go to bed at 1 or 2 a.m., you wake up later the following day, shift your body clock forward, and then go to bed later the day after as well, right? This might not be such a bad thing if you're on vacay, but if you have to go to work, it can be really tough because you're going to start your week with some sleep debt. This term is actually referred to as social jet lag, so you're kind of playing catch up on a Monday and Tuesday sleep-wise by getting your bedtime back on track, and you just don't feel quite like yourself until you do. Now, I fully recognize that it's super important to be social, hang with friends. We're going to touch on that in the next section, but just be aware of how much your bedtime gets pushed and how that impacts your sleep the following night or subsequent nights. It may take you a night or two, maybe even 3 to catch back up and get on with your regular routine again. Now, some good news is that sleep is going to be impacted to a lesser degree the earlier you drink. So essentially, the further you can keep booze away from your bedtime, the better, even if it's 1 or 2 drinks. So happy hour is definitely where it's at. The social connection piece. Alcohol can be an awesome way to facilitate social connection, and that's a big check in the pro column for booze. And then food can fall under this category as well because we humans bond and connect over food and drink. We've been doing so for ages. Now, of course, this is up to a point, right, with booze specifically, because there's bonding and then there's getting wasted and not remembering half of the conversations you had. But a few drinks with friends, family, laughing, telling stories, making fun of each other, it's literally one of the funnest things in the world, and then super important for well-being and overall health as well. Because lack of social connection has actually been shown to have an equivalent health detriment of smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. So this stuff is no joke. Don't miss the forest for the trees here by worrying too much about the calorie content of a couple drinks, because we need that social piece in our lives. Now, lots of folks can be super social without alcohol, but let's be honest, it's usually a little more fun with it. So just consume it socially based on your goals and the time frame you've laid out for yourself. Now, I'm obviously not saying that the only way to connect socially is with alcohol. We can go for lunch, grab coffee, go for a walk with a friend. I mean, you guys don't need me to explain the alternatives, but the point I want to drive home here is that we don't want to deprive ourselves of social connection because of the calories in a couple drinks. Again, you got to think big picture here and long-term sustainability. That's what's most important. Speaking for myself personally, my relationship with alcohol has really shifted over time, and it continues to shift, actually. If you listen to the very first podcast episode, I chatted about some substance abuse issues that I experienced in the past, and fortunately that stuff is behind me now. But I just tend to go through phases with booze. So sometimes I have drinks throughout the week, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'll have a big night out here and there, and other times I won't for months on end. It just really varies on how I feel. For example, the last time I was actually drunk, I think was on Christmas. It hasn't really been anything that I've thought about a ton. Like I said, I go by feel, and most importantly, I weigh out the situation and I ask myself, is another drink worth feeling like X the next day? And if it is, then I go ahead with it. And if it's not, obviously I don't. So I personally get lethally hungover if I drink too much. So I have a super strong response to alcohol as far as the following day. If I overdo it, it's bad. Like I get extremely anxious. Essentially, I feel depressed for a day or two. And that's definitely not my tendency on a daily basis without alcohol in the picture. So that's a really big deterrent for me. But I know that some folks don't actually get all that hungover, which is hard for me to imagine because of how bad my hangovers are, but they just tolerate alcohol better than I do. So with yourself around how you tolerate booze and how it impacts you personally from a mental and emotional angle, just be honest with yourself. This is super important stuff. Before we get into a few more practical take-home tips, one of the most common questions that I get around alcohol is, does it matter if I consume my drink spread evenly throughout the week or all in one shot? So for example, on a Friday or Saturday night. The answer is technically no, it doesn't matter, but practically speaking, for most folks, I think it does because, like we talked about before, the amount of alcohol that you consume at any given time is going to impact your decisions in different ways. So for example, it's likely that one drink per day isn't going to get you drunk and have you make poor food decisions, impact your sleep or your movement all that much, etc. But having 7 drinks in one night will. So in an ideal world, I think that spreading your intake out a little more will probably set you up for better fat loss success. So here's some practical tips. Number 1 is 0-calorie mixers. So skip the calorie-dense pops, juices, syrups, and opt for 0-calorie mixers if you like spirits. Second one is plan movement. So if you're going to head out on a Friday night, plan something active with a friend for the following morning, like a hike or a nice long walk. It'll keep you accountable. And then also preferably plan that with a friend that wasn't out with you the night prior, because you'll probably both be pretty easily convinced otherwise. Number 3 is move ASAP. I mentioned this before. If you didn't plan anything, get up and go for a walk as soon as possible, as it'll help brush off those cobwebs from the night out before. Number 4 is convenience food. So set up your food environment. Have the food you want to eat prepped and ready to go for when you're not feeling your best the day after your fiesta. The key here is to make it as easy as possible to eat the foods you want to eat and then hard to eat the foods you don't want to eat, right? We're creatures of convenience. Number 5 is skip last call. The following morning, I've never personally regretted opting out of last call. It's just, you're making a decision typically from an impaired state. So anyway, skip last call. Number 6 is start early and finish early. So building off of the last tip, the earlier you start and stop drinking, the better. Because like we chatted about before, booze has a serious impact on sleep quality. So again, happy hour is where it's at. And lastly, be the DD. If you don't want to drink for whatever reason, but tend to feel a bit of pressure or just highly tempted when you go out, drive. It's one of the only excuses no one can argue with besides being pregnant, of course. So as we start to wrap up here, Alcohol contains calories in itself, which can impair fat loss if it throws off your caloric balance for the week. But that's just one piece to the puzzle, right? So how that given amount and type of alcohol impacts your food and movement behaviors, as well as your sleep quality, factors into the overall equation as well. So keep in mind that the social connection is extremely important to whole body health too. So alcohol can play a potential beneficial role here, but by no means is it required. And the truth is you're just going to have to balance out all the factors at play, make an informed decision from there based on your goals and the lifestyle you'd like to lead. So that's it, guys. Hope you enjoyed the podcast, found it useful. Feel free to share it with your friends and family if you think that they'd find it useful. And if you're feeling particularly grateful, give the podcast an iTunes review. That really helps it grow, which means we can reach more folks with this information. That would be really, really appreciated. Thanks so much for listening, and I will catch you guys on the next episode. See ya.